Today we're looking at backward verbs. Gustar is the most common of the backward verbs, so we often refer to them as verbs like gustar. The other ones that we're going to be using in this chapter, the other backward verbs, are encantar, which means to love or to be enchanted by, aburrir, which is to be bored by, and interesar, to be interested in. So notice each one of these has a backward phrasing: to be pleasing to be enchanted by, to be bored by, and to be interested in. These are going to be important to remember when we get to the backward part. So the reason that these are called backward verbs is because the form of the verb is going to agree not with the person who is doing the action, but with the thing or things that are being liked, loved, boring, or interesting, etc. So we're only going to have two forms of the verb, singular and plural, both in the third person. So keep in mind that's the bottom row. The verb does not agree with the person. It agrees with the object that's doing the pleasing. The person determines which indirect object pronoun we use. So that's what we're going to look at first. Our indirect object pronouns that we're going to use in place of our subject pronouns are, instead of yo, we will use me. Instead of tú, we are going to use te. Instead of usted, él, and ella, we will use le. Instead of nosotros, nos. Instead of vosotros, os. And instead of ellos, ellas, and ustedes, we will use les. Now, these are just part of the backward verbs. We're going to match these with the third person singular and plural of each of the verbs that are considered backward verbs. But we need to know that we do not use subject pronouns yo, tú, él, ella, usted with these verbs. We will in a different way that I'll explain later, but keep in mind for now that we need to use me, te, le, nos, os, and les with these backward verbs. First, let's look at gustar and exactly how it's conjugated. Like I said, we're not going to use yo, tú, él, ella, usted, but I'm going to keep them there because it's still important to know who is doing the liking. So first, remember I said we're only going to use this third person singular and plural forms that we're going to match with our indirect object pronouns. So that means we will use gusta and we will use gustan. So we're going to use gusta to say that we like one thing and gustan to say that we like more than one thing. This makes sense because this is our singular side and this is our plural side. Now here's where it gets a little bit different. For the yo form, what we would usually call the yo form, we're going to match our indirect object pronoun with our form of gustar. So that looks like this. We will use either me gusta or me gustan. So if I want to say that I like one thing, me gusta el libro. I like the book. The book is pleasing to me. Gusta agrees with the book because it's one thing. Whereas if I want to say that I like more than one thing, me gustan los libros, I need gustan to agree with los libros, so I make gustan plural. The books are pleasing to me. Me gustan los libros. This rule is true for all of the different forms. So we just need to match the correct indirect object pronoun with either gusta or gustan. That means that if you like something, you will either say te gusta if you like one thing, or te gustan if you like more than one thing. If he or she or you formal like something, our forms are either le gusta or le gustan. For nosotros, nos gusta if we like one thing, nos gustan if we like more than one thing. Vosotros, os gusta, we like one thing. Os gustan, we like more than one thing. Remember, vosotros is just in Spain if we're talking to a group of people informally. Finally, we have the ellos, ellas, and ustedes form. We will use les gusta or les gustan. If they like one thing, le gusta, or if they like more than one thing, les gustan. Now, what I want you to note is that the me, te, le, nos, os, and les pieces are not going to change. So let's look at another example of a verb and see how it's similar yet slightly different. Let's look at the form of the verb aburrir. We know that we only need the third person singular and the third person plural forms of the verb. So we can conjugate aburrir according to the rules that we already know, taking off ir and adding the new ending just in these two forms. So we are going to use aburre if we if we are bored by one thing, and aburren if we're bored by more than one thing. So we still need to match these with me, te, le, nos, os, and les. So if I am bored by something, that means that I will either use me aburre or me aburren, depending if I'm bored by one thing or more than one thing. We're still going to use that aburre and aburren for all of these forms. If you are bored by something, either te aburre or te aburren. If he, she, or you formal is bored by something, le aburre or le aburren. If we are bored, nos aburre or nos aburren. If you guys are bored, os aburre, os aburren. And if they or you all are bored, les aburre or les aburren. An example. As usual, I'll use my vosotros box since that one's never going to be on a test. If I want to say, I am bored by the class, me aburre la clase. The reason this is backwards is because the class is boring to me. The class is singular, which is why we use aburre, and I am the person who is bored by the class. One more example is interesar, to be interested by. So we have our two forms again. Interesa and interesan. So if one thing interests me, interesa. If more than one thing interests me, interesan. So our forms are going to be me interesa or interesan, te interesa or interesan, le interesa or interesan, nos interesa or interesan, os interesa or interesan, and les interesa or interesan. Again, interesa if one thing is interesting, and interesan if more than one thing is interesting. My final point with these backward verbs is because we're not using yo, to, el, ella, usted, etc. as our subject, we're going to use them as kind of clarifying phrases. So the way that we do this with backward verbs is to place a before the name or subject pronoun in order to stress who is liking or loving or being bored by or interested in something. So usually we can just use a subject pronoun or a person's name, but we have two irregular forms. We cannot say a yo me gusta, we must say a mí me gusta. Similar, we cannot say a tú te gustan, we must say a ti te gustan. For the rest of the forms, all of the rest of the subject pronouns, we can say a ellos, a él, a nosotros, a vosotros, or a person's name or a general title, like a Margarita, a la profesora, al alumno. All of these can be used in place of a name or a subject pronoun, but it needs to be used to make clear who is being pleased or bored or interested. Note this always comes before the form of the backward verb.